So the first video I did for you this week was almost 25 minutes long, which is not a best practice. But if you were actually in a classroom together, my lecture might last that long, so I decided to let it be. But there is another important factor that we need to look at as we're refining our research questions and moving towards our research design. And that is contained in the book, Decolonizing Research. So I wanted to break down the core principles and practices from that book so that you could be sure to think about them as you're refining your questions and preparing your design. So I'm using the chapter on the Kalaupapa Maori model because I think it really helps us to distill what the core principles are. So basically there are two core areas that you need to keep in mind. And the first one goes back to that whole question about participation. How are your research subjects involved in your research? And there is in qualitative research a variety of different levels of involvement that you can provide. Participatory action research is typically the title given to the research that involves people from the beginning to the end who are being researched in a variety of ways. So if you're going to decolonize research, it needs to be participatory action research because there needs to be a much greater level of participation than there often is in any kind of qualitative research, and certainly than any kind of quantitative research. And part of why that's true is because research has historically often been used to learn information about people that then later can be utilized to exploit them. Research has also just plain and simple gotten it wrong when it concerns people who are at the margins of society, and gotten it wrong in ways that are very damaging for their well-being as individuals and as a group. So research, if you're going to research people who have less social power and have a history of discrimination, exploitation, and abuse, you have to make sure that that research is culturally safe. Because otherwise, even apart from any other ethical consideration, it won't be effective because people won't trust you, going back to moving at the speed of trust. So what does it look like to engage people as fully as possible in the research process? So the first element of that engagement needs to be permission. The book underlines that permission can't just come from some young person or some person at the edge of the community, that it really needs to be permission from community elders. That you have to understand who the elders are in a community, who has the authority, who has the respect of the whole community, and you need to put your proposal before them before you begin to research people, and they need to mentor you along the way. And that has to be a core part of your ethical positioning and your ethical commitment, is how do you listen to the people who are elders in that community as you carry out your research. Secondly, the research team itself needs to involve people from the community and that you're studying. And that means not only are they involved so that they have a voice, but they're also directly involved in the tasks of carrying out the research. And sometimes that involves some training. So that part of what you're doing is equipping the people in a community to continue research, which of course we all need, right? If the research is worth doing in the first place, it's worth doing in a way that continually broadens and deepens. So the research team, who's on the research team, how you equip the research team. Number 3, in terms of participation, is of course that your design needs to reflect the epistemology of the people. Remember, epistemology is our understanding of how we know what is true. So part of how most indigenous people see the world, or many people on the margins, different from people at the center of power, is that they understand that there are many truths, not just one universal truth. And again, we're not talking about God here, we're talking about people's interpretation. There is not one correct interpretation of the world. There are many interpretations of the world that limited human beings see, and that's one reason why we need each other across the lines of culture and class and all the different ways that we are divided. So there is an epistemology that is often in common between people at the margins. The first one is this understanding of multiple truths. It means that your work needs to be radically local. And local doesn't always mean geography. It just means that you understand that what you are learning is not necessarily transferable to everyone, that you are going deep into a particular group of people, and that you respect their subjective perspective. Elie Wiesel says we are most universal and we are most particular. And I think that that would be a typical epistemology of people at the margins, is that their very particular way of seeing the world is going to be useful for the larger whole. The other epistemological difference among marginalized people is that they believe in their collective identity, that they believe in the importance of their interconnections. And many Indigenous people believe not only in the importance of the connections between people, but the importance between people and the natural environment. So you can't honor marginalized people if you are studying them and only look at individuals. You really have to look at the group as a whole. You have to look at the interconnections between people, at their relationships, at the patterns that happen between and within groups rather than just individuals. Then lastly, you need to report back. You need to share knowledge on a regular basis and get their feedback. So I've mentioned before that I did this kind of research. I did participatory action research intuitively. I wanted to do it long before anybody told me what it was, but I just knew my community. And I knew that the way to not only respect my community, but to ensure that the research was accurate was to have regular report backs where people gave me feedback. So, and what the book says is that you need to report back not only to the community in a sort of general sense, but you need to report back to the elders in particular. So, purpose. That part of what decolonized research recognizes is that research is never neutral. Like I said, it's been used in the past to exploit and control, and it has damaged marginalized communities. So it's completely understandable that marginalized communities would want to know your purpose in studying them, and they would want to make sure that there was a benefit to the community studied. They would also want to make sure that the fundamental perspective of the researcher includes a concern with their struggle for autonomy and well-being. So that goes back to our ethics, even just our ethics as Christians, that do we have this fundamental stance of love for the people that we're studying? And what are the implications of that for every aspect of how we do our study? And then lastly, let's get down and dirty, let's get concrete, that the politics and the finances of research are important factors in whether or not research is decolonized. Who gets the money? Who controls the money? Who makes the decisions? How is that research strategically positioned as you report? The decolonized research experts would say that none of these questions are neutral and that we need to make sure to answer them well. So thank you. I hope that was useful. Blessings.